This is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the sound bites. When I say we have a repeat guest tonight, we have a repeat guest from about 2 weeks ago, Mike Covey, who is, what is your title at the Vermont Traditions Coalition?
I am the Executive Director.
The Executive Director. Well, Mike was on the show with Eric, who is here with me this evening, Eric LaMontagne, and we kept talking and talking, and the hour was up, and we had so many more things to say. We invited him back. So thanks for coming back.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah. Eric, nice to see you.
Happy to be here.
Yeah. So as I said, Mike's worked for the Vermont Federation of Sportsmen's Clubs, the Vermont Trappers Association, and now works as the Executive Director for the Vermont Traditions Coalition. So there you go. Busy.
Yeah.
I have been.
Exactly.
And well, talk to us, Mike. You guys use the slogan, working to protect our cultural heritage. What does that mean? How does it fold into the organization's mission and its priorities?
So Vermont's cultural heritage is a rural economy and rural recreational heritage. You know, we're portrayed as a rural state, we're seen as a rural state. It's one of our big selling points. So activities like forestry, agriculture, you know, motorized recreation like snow machines, hunting, fishing, trapping, and the shooting sports all have a very strong purpose, a real strong place in presence in the state of Vermont. So those are the things that we're interested in promoting and protecting.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I grew up doing all that stuff, and I think those lessons that you can learn when you're out there, and you got to figure out, okay, to shoot my, you know, it teaches kids patience when they got to take out the knots in the fishing line or sit there and wait for the deer to get to the right place. So that's excellent.
Yeah, I read a great story in a Outdoor Life or one of those magazines years ago, more years than I care to say. And it was an editor, the editor of the magazine, talking about the fact that he had wanted to take a day off from school to go see the president. The president was going to be in a nearby town, and he wanted to go do that, and his father wouldn't let him take the time from school. And he asked him, well, you let me go hunt, you let me take time off to do that, but you won't let me take time off to see the president? And his father's response was that you know, the president's a good man, as far as he knew, but that he was just a man and he might be wrong, and that any lesson that he learned while he was out in the woods and on the water would be a truth. It would be a lesson that he could take with it.
Wow.
Interesting. It's a good story.
Excellent. Very nice. When we talked about you coming back on the show, you said the overarching benefits of outdoor sports. You talked about it as a lump sum discussion, and I'd love to have you talk about the impact of sports on our economy and what it does for Vermont.
Well, we've only got an hour to talk about the benefits.
I'll give it to you all. Go ahead.
No, you know, to be concise, it does have an economic impact, but beyond that, you know, it creates these really strong interactions, memories, and associations within families, within communities, within friend groups, and it really deeply connects us to the landscape in a manner that's, I believe I said this last time, and I don't want to cover old ground,
right,
but that's more intimate and less superficial than merely hiking or paddling,
right,
where you're kind of passing through nature. When you undertake those pursuits of hunting, of fishing, of trapping, you're becoming immersed and becoming a part of that cycle, and becoming more intimately tied to the landscape through it.
That's great. I love that. You're living it.
I live it. I have to.
I know
love
you do. That's great.
That's where I'm rooted.
So last September, you wrote a commentary. It was meant to address some of the misconceptions that happen around trapping and some of the outdoor sports for folks that don't grow up and don't understand it because they've never been exposed to it. So the article is titled "Hunters, Trappers, Key to Wildlife Management." Can you go over that message a little bit for us?
I can boil it down a bit. So the sporting community has for a very long time, over a century at this point, driven the concepts of conservation that we've all come to appreciate. And through that, we've driven the resurgence, repaired the damage, as it were, from market hunting in the 1800s on many species, you know, white-tailed deer, wild turkeys, Beyond that, there are benefits to the individuals engaged in those pursuits in terms of high protein, organic, green, locally sourced foods,
Right.
pelts, which are again another renewable resource, an organic resource that's locally sourced and can contribute to a degree to the economy. It's not a strong contributor. I wouldn't say that trapping, well, actually, we tend to boil things down to the product, right? But if we look at a broader picture, trapping can prevent damage. Often, in the case of beavers, they're the most typical animal causing damage. But I know of a farm rescue. The folks are vegans. They're good people trying to do good things. They took a week off from work and flew a goat with a cleft palate out to Ohio to get it surgery and so that it could
Oh, you're
do
kidding.
well. So
That is amazing.
they're really invested in this, and they had a bobcat come in and kill 30 of their animals. So despite being vegan and really invested in the well-being of animals, they acknowledged that this was a problem and that a trapper was the most appropriate way to solve it.
Right.
Because that's a significant loss, when you're trying to save these
For
animals, to have one individual animal come in. So you need to be able to acknowledge those values of it as well.
Right.
And when you start doing that, it gets really cloudy as to the real ceiling of the value that it provides. Similarly, hunting, when people are buying gear, they're buying firearms, ammunition. Not only is that contributing to a local economy, it contributes to the Pittman-Robertson Fund, which is the National Wildlife Restoration Act of 1936. And those funds are collected and then doled back out to states for
Are
conservation.
they just through the licenses to that fund, or guns and?
There's an 11% excise tax on sporting equipment.
Oh, no kidding! I didn't know that.
Yep, that's been there since 1936, and at that time, the world was a much different place, and sportsmen had acknowledged that there was a real problem with many of our iconic game animals. White-tailed deer were
Right.
in real danger of becoming extinct, and were extirpated in many parts of the country. So this tax was actually, this bill at a federal level was actually supported strongly by hunters and trappers and so forth. Similarly, the Dingell-Johnson Act, which is the American Sportfish Restoration Act, and I believe that was 1942, set up those same parameters in terms of restoring fisheries. So every time a sportsman purchases one of the tools of their trade, they're also funding conservation down the line, because that money will be returned to states for various projects and not necessarily just game-related projects that benefits all wildlife.
Great.
Many of our game-related work
Yeah.
also contributes all wildlife. A great deal of wildlife, not all wildlife, but a great deal of wildlife identifies very heavily with edge. So when we're managing for white-tailed deer, we're helping ruffed grouse and American woodcock as well.
That's great. So at the end of this article, it was a very interesting article, by the way, well written, because I understood it. So that's sixth grade, something or other. But anyway, you said it's time for change in wildlife management, and then there was a whole bunch of stuff. And then you said it is certainly time for those who consider themselves non-consumptive users to join in and contribute to the expense. And I thought that was very interesting, where people are out in the woods enjoying the woods, but not living the woods, that you think perhaps they should chip in and help too. I thought that was pretty good.
So about 30% of the funding that the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department receives is generated through license sales.
Right.
An additional 30% is generated through those funding mechanisms from the federal government, which are also contributed by sportsmen. About 25% of their funding comes from the general fund, and then the rest of it comes from smaller sources like the habitat stamp. But interestingly, they find that most of the folks who buy habitat stamps and contribute to the non-game wildlife fund are doing it while they're buying their hunting and fishing licenses. So, how much that equates to is, not really, you can't really sort that out, but it's probably another % or so. So the lion's share of contribution comes from sportsmen. and it's interesting. We've had this dialogue for 3 or 4 years now, where there are groups who are fundamentally opposed to hunting and trapping, and who occasionally even speak out against fishing. You know.
Fishing.
Yeah, interestingly, a fellow caught a record gar out of Lake Champlain last year, and kept it, and you know, it was a new state record.
Right. Wow.
And so this was a big deal, and on a WCAX Facebook post about it, one of the anti-hunting organizations, who was ostensibly focused on coyotes, was berating WCAX for running this story because this fellow shouldn't be aggrandized for killing this beautiful fish. So,
sorry.
you know, so these groups are also saying that they need a seat at the table.
Right.
You know, they're speaking that they have a bill H190, which is a kind of a reprise of last year's bill, which required placing anti-hunting folks on the Fish and Wildlife Board.
Oh, interesting.
Which is a strategy,
Right.
but it's not really appropriate. You know, the Fish and Wildlife Board's job is not to determine whether we may or may not hunt or trap,
Right.
simply how we may
Right,
go
to
about
manage
those
it.
activities.
Yeah.
But you know, they're invested in finding any mechanism they can to pick at the edges of that.
Huh. Don't know how I feel
so-
about that. Trying to remain neutral.
Well,
But
the
seems to me
I'll
maybe
allow you
participating
to
without
remain,
a vote.
I'll allow you to remain neutral,
Yes.
and I'll continue to speak.
Oh, go right ahead.
So that's what that comment's kind of driven at. You know, we have these organizations out there being very derisive of hunters, and not just of folks like myself who have taken a position that puts us into the fight, as it were.
Right.
You know, puts us into the discussion on a legislative level. But picking out individual sportsmen, you know, a fellow loading his dogs with his children, and throwing up a picture, and then leadership from this organization makes the statement, you know, as a caption to this photograph them and shame them wherever possible. You know, another trapper, a trapper who is you know, with his son next to a raccoon that he
Right.
trapped, you know, his young son, and
Right.
you know, these people are just sadistic killers, and some really just absolutely negative personal
Right.
comments that are directed at individuals, not even people who've chosen to be a part of that dialogue.
Huh.
You know, if I receive negative commentary, then I presume that means I'm doing well at my work. You know, I presume that means that I've done something that they find so untenable that
Yeah.
they can't counter it with logic, so they need to counter it with
Right.
vitriol.
Right.
But for the individual on their own time, on their own business, to have to deal with that is a little bit inappropriate.
Because I think it's great. There's somebody I know on Facebook who takes his son out all the time to do all the sports. They're just always doing everything. And the pictures of the son doing with dad in the woods and the things. I mean, I think it's wonderful. It's memories he'll never forget, and it's such a bonding opportunity for my friend and his son.
It
It's
truly
great.
is, and it's. I know I said this last time, but I'm going to reiterate it. You know, if you teach somebody to hunt, fish, trap, and you give them that deep love for the landscape and that understanding that what they love is derived from the landscape, so
Right.
they need to maintain the sanctity of it, they will be more invested in land and water conservation
Yeah.
than any individual who spends their life on concrete.
That's great. And we still continue to be the safest state in the nation, right?
I think we're-
No, I think we're first. I think I saw an article on Facebook, wasn't it recently, that said we're #1 for safety? And
We tend to flip-flop back
Do
and
we?
forth
Or
with
one and
Maine,
two? Oh.
so we're usually
We're
either one or
definitely
two.
top 3.
oh, really? Well, I just.
We're generally
so
either
obviously
one or
we're
two.
teaching our kids something,
Yeah.
and teaching them the right way to handle guns and the right way to do
And a
things.
respect for it. And
Yep.
my son was 7 when
Really?
he shot his first deer.
Oh, and he must have been so excited.
And, well, you would think that, right? And so
Bambi.
I've never been a high-fiving guy.
Yeah.
You know, when I shoot an animal, I'm pleased. I'm glad that the hunt went
Right.
well. But my son at 7, with no guidance in that direction, you know, just seeing how he reacted.
Right.
He walked over. He made sure the animal was expired. He unloaded his gun. It was a little single shot break
Yeah.
action youth model, you know. And he set that aside. And then he knelt down and he picked her head up and smoothed her fur out. And he said, "You're a big one, aren't you, girl?"
Whoa.
And he was very amazingly mature, I think is probably the
great.
best way to phrase it. I don't really know how to
Yeah.
put it into words,
Well,
but
he
it was
understood what
solemn,
happened
you know,
and-
and he understood, exactly. He understood the gravity of it.
Yeah, right. Good for him, Dad.
So
You
we're
taught him
teaching
well.
them more than just how to track and how to read sign, you know.
Well, I always watch all the Alaskan. I don't know if you watch all the families that live in the
I,
last Alaskan and the kilters, and whenever they shoot an animal, they always thank him.
Yep.
Because they definitely shoot because they need the meat. They bring it home, and that's what they live on through the winter. And they're always respecting and thanking the animal for providing food for the family.
Yep.
So that's really cool.
And I mean, you touched on an interesting subject there, and I'm going to go off script a little bit here. I'll warn you.
I can tell because you don't have your questions in your hand.
But this
here.
was something we touched on a little bit at the end of the last show, and because there's a lot of folks that grow up, and there's fewer and fewer people who do grow up with any exposure to hunting and any exposure to fishing. You know, luckily we are seeing trends in licensed sales for fishing going up, but there's a lot of folks out there who don't understand that it's not just, you know, yahoos in camo going out and blasting animals and shooting to kill and, you know, yeehawing about it. It's there is a deep reverence to it and an understanding of, as you said, the gravity of the situation and understanding, you know, what does it mean to take that life and knowing that it's not just taking a life for the sake of taking it, but because you know that it will feed families and it will, you know, bring family together and help to feed the community. So as we think, as sportsmen, as we think about what can we do to, you know, help those folks that don't understand and are seeing a lot of that vitriol about, oh, these are, you know, they're just killers and slayers and slaughterers. I guess it comes down to the question: does hunting and fishing have an image problem in Vermont or in general? And do, as hunters and fishermen and sportsmen and women, do we need to do things? Should we need to do things to help ourselves be less controversial with people who might be on the fence about whether or not they support this, and because they don't have a full understanding of it?
So there are a whole bunch of nuances to that, one of which is that I recently, within the last couple of years, I once had somebody say, "Hey, can you get your guys under control?" Who are my guys? There are, just hunters alone, there are 65,000 hunters in the state of Vermont. That's 1/10 of the population. When we add in anglers, they're about 20% of the population of Vermont is
Wow.
engaged in the outdoor sports. The only state that has a higher rate of engagement than us is Alaska. So there are a lot of people out there, and with those numbers, some of them are going to make bad decisions. To suggest that that reflects upon the entire community is, in my opinion, inappropriate. You know, we can look at any activity and we can single out a few folks that we wish weren't participating because of how they're participating. The problem that I see with the vitriol that you talked about and the question of if Vermont sportsmen have an image problem leads me to pose a question. And I posed this question actually just last week to the House Fish and Wildlife Committee. Think back 5 years and think about what your perception was of sportsmen in the state of Vermont compared to what it is now. These organizations that are driving the narrative, they're driving a negative public view for the sake of pushing that narrative and promoting their agenda. You know, and in fairness, sportsmen have done a terrible job of talking about the good things we do, talking about the value that we add. You know, not only to our communities, but to the resource, you know, the benefits to the resource, which I went into a long soliloquy about one other time when I was on your show, so I'm not going to do that today. But further benefits, you know, in terms of some of these organizations out there, like the Vermont Trappers Association, the Vermont Bear Hounds Association, the Vermont Federation of Sportsmen's Clubs, not to minimize the contribution of Lions clubs and others who do this. There are a number of other clubs, but if we're talking about benefits that the sporting community provides to their communities at large, those three organizations send a significant number of children to conservation camps on an annual basis. The Trappers Association has a policy in that they've never turned down a child who's applied. You know, they contribute to programs outside of themselves, like Let's Go Fishing. I can't speak to the other two as well, but having been very intimately involved with the Trappers Association for years, they actually give out 2 college scholarships to folks who are entering conservation fields. You know, kids who are seniors graduating and going into a conservation field. They don't. So, you know, we've kind of created a vacuum that allows this vitriol to flow into it by going about our business, putting our heads down and doing our thing, and kind of ignoring everything outside of that and not having those dialogues. So I would suggest that, you know, if people don't have an understanding, rather than take the negativity that they see at face value, with 20% of the population engaged in these outdoor sports, somebody in your town, regardless of where you live, is a hunter, a fisherman, probably even a trapper. You know, we have the Vermont Trappers Association has over 1,000 members, and there are 250 towns in the state of Vermont. So there's a pretty good chance there's a trapper.
And we also need to remember that if you're a trapper, that isn't your job. I mean, that's not what you have probably have a job. And some of the folks in the Trapping Association, they work at AOT, and you know, director of AOT and working supervisors, and they all have jobs. They're part of our community working.
I know a trapper who is a very conscientious trapper. He's also a medical professional.
Yeah, there you go.
And he keeps those 2 aspects of his life very separated because of the negativity that's being put forth.
Right.
So I think that, you know, as with everything, the baseline answer to your question is communicate.
Yeah.
If people have questions, if people have misunderstandings or don't know if they understand correctly, they should communicate. Find somebody to talk to. You know, go on a website and reach out to the people who are being spoken about, and instead of simply listening to them be spoken about, speak to them.
Right.
What about is there anything on a proactive viewpoint that, you know, as a hunter, what can I do to make sure that I'm best serving the sport in my capacity?
Speak to people.
I just join some of these associations.
Yeah, definitely join some of these associations. And get on mailing lists so you know what's going on. You know, there are a lot of us, far too many of us, who are not in touch with what's happening, either in Montpelier, regulatory level, or whatever. You know, we'll interface with Facebook all day long. It never ceases to amaze me. We will interface with that platform all day long. But when it comes time to actually interface with our legislators, most of us will beg it off, and we'll presume somebody else is going to take care of that for us.
Absolutely.
And there's no more, you know, there's no more valuable use of your time than interfacing with your representation, than outside of potentially recruiting more people to enjoy the sport. You know, even if somebody doesn't have an interest in doing it, if they have an interest in going with you and seeing what it's about, take them. You know?
Have you ever done presentations like to Rotaries in Kiwanis? And
I haven't.
Oh, but maybe somebody should put together a presentation, because they're always looking for people to talk and present. And I bet they'd be interested to hear about the kids you're sending to camps and grants and stuff. That's amazing. And this is part of our culture, is it not? I mean,
It is. It
Vermont
truly is.
and trapping, hunting, and fishing is just sort of synonymous with the Vermont.
Yeah, when talking about this conversation, I've noted a bunch of times that in anthropology, it's considered taboo to try to do away with the culture. Yet here we have
We're
some
working on
folks. Here we have some folks who have who have often moved here from away. Most of the leadership, in fact, has moved here from away.
I moved here from away, but I do not try to do that.
Yeah, and I know I'm walking a thin
No,
line
that's
with this
okay.
statement.
I try
but,
to respect what I moved into.
When folks come here and then say, well, there are only X amount of people engaged in this activity, so it should be invalid.
Right.
That's appalling from a
That they even have that mindset, for
yeah,
heaven's sake.
we don't accept that with any social group.
No, really.
So why would we accept that with hunters or trappers?
And you have to spend a lot of days up in that legislature too, don't you, Mike?
I do, but I enjoy it because my job now is the greatest job in the world. I get to talk to people about things I love. It's truly meaningful to me.
That's great. I don't mean to change the subject totally, but one of the things that you had sent me a list of things that we could talk about, and you talked about the forest products industry.
Yes.
And we've had Bill Sayer on this show more than once talking about forest products. And I was excited because you said to talk about the potential for forest products and the impact on our economy, because when he was here, things were a little rough for the forest products industry, and I'm hoping that what you said may mean that things are turning around a little bit.
They are still rough. There's an interesting parallel in that the median age for people engaged in the forest products industry and the median age for people engaged in the outdoor sports
Right.
are over 50
Oh.
for both of them.
Yeah.
But the interesting piece of the forest products industry, this is a lot of these numbers were new to me last Tuesday. I was able to go to a forestry roundtable at Vermont Technical College, and it was
really?
very informative. So Vermont, the state of Vermont, is currently growing wood at twice the rate that we are losing wood.
Oh, that's a good statistic.
It is, and that's that's through all mechanisms. That's not twice the rate we're harvesting wood. It's twice the rate that we're losing wood. So we have all this potential growth in our forests, and we have a forest products industry that, in terms of what they can process in the state, it's about 93 million board feet a year.
Wow.
There are mills just across the border in Canada
Right.
where individual mills can process over 100 million. So not only are we shipping a bunch of our timber that's harvested
Right.
north of the border, we have timber being shipped from south of us, from states like Massachusetts and Connecticut and so forth, and being shipped through Vermont to Canada. To me, that paints a very clear picture that we need mills. We need wood processing facilities
Right.
in the worst way possible, because this would have the greatest impact on rural economies, and it would have a very positive impact on rural economies. So, my thought would be, why are we looking at, Act 250 as a mechanism to lock people down even further and restrict them from what they can do? When we have this great tool, this great renewable resource, and we can really kickstart the economy in the state of Vermont by expanding on that, why aren't we looking at relaxing the regulations around putting some of these facilities into motion?
Right.
I understand that we need to be very careful with those natural resources. It's crucial. If we're not, to put it down to a selfish level, because that makes it easy,
Yep.
I don't get to hunt and fish.
Yeah.
And that's a real problem for me. But I think that, we can find sustainable mechanisms to really promote the forest products industry, and there's a ton of potential for growth there.
Do you think years ago there was a big brouhaha about the amount of acreage you could clear cut, I guess has that policy helped to grow other woods and stuff like you're talking about, or is that has not been helpful?
There was a long period of time where there was a very negative view of logging.
Right.
And that certainly grew forests, but I don't believe that's a driver for the fact that we are currently seeing twice the amount of growth that we are seeing lost. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think they're distinct.
Because I've been here a while, and that fight was ridiculous about 40 acres You
Yeah,
couldn't
it's-
clear cut more than 40? Was that my memory?
It's,
Something
it
like
could be.
that.
I wasn't
Yeah.
around for that.
Oh, that
but,
was a dandy.
It's
That's-
entertaining that
yeah.
in my high school yearbook,
Yeah.
one of my pet peeves was listed as logging.
Oh, you're kidding.
And, well, because I didn't understand, right?
Yeah.
I didn't understand the value of that to habitat management.
Yeah.
I didn't understand the value to the economy. All I saw was what I thought looked like an ugly hole in the woods,
Right.
right? And unfortunately, a lot of our folks in the state, I think still see that. You know,
Yeah.
they just see an ugly hole in the woods. Whereas now, I'm older, I've read more,
Yeah.
learned more, and I've come to understand that that ugly hole in the woods is 2 or 3 years away from being some of the best wildlife habitat we can provide
Right.
for a vast majority of species, and that wood will replace itself.
Something I want to ask you what you think about the wind towers. No, we won't ask.
I should probably just bite my tongue
Yes,
on that
really,
one.
I can imagine.
I struggle with the concept of blasting the tops of our mountains
Yeah, that
off.
won't grow back. They don't grow back. Does anybody
Yeah.
realize that?
Especially when one of those projects was, you know, slated to occur and would have removed, well, I believe it did. I believe it was it was put through and mitigation was allowed, but 200 acres of bear-scarred beach.
Wow.
That we knew bears were traveling as far from Massachusetts. You know, if we're going to protect our wildlife, that's a great place to start.
Yeah, well, they even, I mean, the road all the way up to the tower is huge. I mean, it's very wide, and that just cuts through, right?
But I
Seems
think
a little
I
ironic.
think that's delving into personal.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I
Should
just thought
clarify
of them.
that.
Yeah,
but, well,
it's a little ironic that we promote that as a positive thing for
Yeah.
the state, but we're trying to lock it down so people can't put a house on, 5 acres of
yeah,
land.
right. But we could put wind towers.
But
Yeah.
as you said, maybe we're
Yeah.
getting into personal opinions
Yeah,
on
no, I'm
some
sorry.
stuff.
It just popped into my head.
You know, so as it relates to Act 250, as forestry and Act 250 relate to each other, we heard some really compelling testimony from A&R and from Forest Parks and Rec, talking about the fact that, one aspect that was proposed of this new Act 250 legislation
Right.
was to lower the elevation threshold for logging and agricultural practices from 2,500 feet to 2,000 feet. So the real world effect of that, currently at 2,500 feet, anything above that, Act 250 automatically kicks in. You need an Act 250 review on your agricultural or forestry practices. That encapsulates about 190,000 acres of the state. If they lower that threshold to 2,000 feet, they will pick up an additional 513,000 acres.
Wow.
And having spoken with some foresters, the process has become so complex that it's very difficult to justify the effort to engage in a forestry operation above 2,500 feet. So if we have those same issues occurring down to 2,000 feet and we've captured that much more of the state, A&R testified, and I thought it was great, that they think that will actually drive forest fragmentation.
Huh.
They said if people can't get a forester to come in and they can't harvest timber off their land to
Enough
pay
to
their
make money.
taxes and
Right,
so forth,
sure.
then the only remaining possibility for them is to parcelize the land.
Right.
So you've gone from a practice that's very compatible with unfragmented forests to creating a situation where that may be the only mechanism for people to keep the rest of their land.
What is the rationale for whatever, 2,000 under and over? What changes in the terrain, or why are they so interested in the higher elevation? What's there that I'm not making sense, I'm sure, but
I'm torn between saying that's a very good question and chuckling. And there are at some high elevations, there are definitely some real concerns. Soil depth, slope, potentially fragile communities. So there are real concerns in places, but quite often blanket legislation fails in really achieving a reasonable goal.
Right.
It may seem good on superficially, but the problems that it creates exceed the value. And as far as the 2,000 to 2,500 foot, that just seems exceptionally arbitrary.
Yeah, just a number they picked.
Actually, one legislator suggested that they go to 1,500 feet, and I shudder to think of what that would do to the economy and the landscape of Vermont in terms of being able to keep it intact and utilize it.
Right. Oy.
Well, maybe now's a good time since we've referenced this.
Yeah.
We've referenced this a whole bunch. Is to have the Act 250 conversation, because I know that you guys also work a lot with water quality stuff and land management, and all of this is kind of wrapped up into this omnibus Act 250 bill that's being worked on right now. Can you give us a brief? We got 20 minutes left, so we got a little bit of time.
I just want to talk about some of the legislation too, but Act 250 is right up there.
I can keep Act 250 really brief. I will note that we don't actually do a lot of work on water quality stuff. There are a lot of people who are dealing with water quality issues, and despite being ancillary to what we do, it falls outside of our purview, in that none of our user groups are involved in that on the degree that it's being looked at the moment.
Well, no, that makes sense, because when you have groups like LCI that's out there doing a lot of really good water quality, I'm sure you guys support one another, but if that work's being done, how can you prioritize?
Right.
Understand that.
So Act 250 is essentially been the biggest bill this session that has not done anything.
Yay.
They've been taking testimony on it. They're still taking testimony on it. I believe they're on their 6th or 7th version. So it's a work in progress, and what we're going to end up with is still very much cloudy at this time. It's obviously very contentious. It's contentious amongst agencies. It's contentious amongst committees at the State House, and it's contentious among community members and organizations. It's an 81-page bill.
Wow.
So there's so much in there that it touches on everybody, and that creates a very difficult situation for legislation.
This is going to be more of a 2-year attempt, right? Because they can't possibly get that out of the House
I
this
have
year.
to think, unless they actually finalize something and try to do it as a committee bill of some sort. But
Because they've been meeting in the Ethan Allen room, right?
The Ethan Allen room's not even big enough.
No, I know. I was just going to say that.
They
That's
need the
that
chamber.
hardly. Yeah.
It's I sat in that committee room one day for 2 hours without a single legislator in there because I got the last seat.
Oh wow.
And it's been that way the entire session. It's a packed house every time, every day, every meeting.
Well, Act 250 sort of runs a lot in the state, so you need to watch it. Because and maybe I'm wrong, and if I am, please correct me. The thought process is to get more people to move towards town rather than be out in the rural areas, which to me is like, why bother living in Vermont? It's nice being in town, but I want my acreage and my home away from town.
Right. Yeah.
And they're trying to make it difficult.
To encourage people to settle in compact urban areas, is I believe how it was phrased.
Look at that.
So is there
Very
anything that folks should know about it now, or it sounds like there's so many pieces that are still in motion that whatever you might say about it now could be totally incorrect by the time this airs?
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. There have been a lot of changes made, and I expect that will continue.
Yeah. So I looked up, I sent you the list of all the bills in House Committee on Natural Resources, and not so much in the Senate. There's just a handful of bills, and you said nothing much is happening. But in the House, the one that just hit Facebook today was H357, the wanton waste.
Yes.
Sounds like, I don't know what it sounds like, wanton waste. Could you talk about that? That sounds a little funky.
I can. I think the big thrust on that bill has been that the folks who have testified in support of it have made the contention that engagements like crow hunting, coyote hunting, are wanton waste by their nature. So I testified on the bill, as I'm sure you saw in the article, and the point that I made was that management is a valid reason to harvest these animals.
Right.
So every time I've seen these folks mention the North American model of wildlife management, which has been something that's, interestingly, I've previously been chastised by them for supporting. And they mentioned this North American model of wildlife management, which has 7 tenets, and they editorialize the piece that says wildlife should not be killed frivolously. And they go on to say this is what frivolous is. That's not part of that. That's not part of that line item.
So what is so wanton about killing coyotes? Because you don't eat the meat?
Their statement is that if the coyote's pelt is valueless,
Right.
if it's outside of that time of year where the pelt is prime,
Yeah.
then it's wanton.
Oh,
And so the point I made was that no, management is a very valid reason,
For sure.
and that in areas where, well, the coyotes are prevalent on the landscape to start
they're in my
with.
backyard, thank you.
They are. They're healthy. They're prevalent in terms of herd size
Yeah.
across the state. So this is not a negative population driver. It's a mitigating factor. It
Right.
moderates populations, perhaps. When you say that, you'll hear people say, "Well, no, because they do compensatory reproduction." So they put forth compensatory reproduction as the idea that if coyotes are shot, they'll just breed more and more and more to make up for it. And that's not actually how it works. There's a very
They keep reading those signs along
Yeah.
the road, right?
there's a very well-known
shooting.
biologist, Eric Geese, and he's written quite a bit about coyote reproduction and so forth. And the findings have been that, as you would expect, healthier animals have larger litters.
Right.
So if you have less coyotes on the landscape, they will have larger litters when they breed. If you have more coyotes on the landscape, there's more interest-specific competition for food resources.
Right.
So they are less healthy and they have smaller litters.
Interesting.
So compensatory reproduction is often misrepresented. The real basis of it is, are there too many on the landscape, or are there a healthy amount?
I don't have any research to back this up, but I've been in my home for 23 years. And the last 2 years, I have heard coyotes all the time, walking at night with my dog in the dark. And you hear that sound, just makes you turn around and go right home.
I love it.
Well, but there's more of them, isn't there? Or aren't there?
I can't speak to that.
well,
I don't have any data
maybe they just
to
moved to
support
the
that
back of my
statement or
house.
deny that statement. But we have these animals healthy on the landscape, and then in terms of the crow conversation, this wanton waste rule was brought up, and it's commonly been spoken about in terms of there's a rule at a federal level that disallows the wanton waste of waterfowl. So if you shoot a duck, if you
Right.
shoot a goose, or any other of those migratory bird
Right.
species, you are statutorily required to make a good effort to recover it. If you can recover it, you have to recover it and remove it from the field. And so that statute keeps being brought up, but as a part of that same suite of statutes about migratory birds,
Right.
crows are a migratory bird, and they're covered under that same international
Oh.
treaty. And that same suite of statutes also designates crow hunting opportunities for all of the states with the exception of Hawaii. And I didn't dig into it to find out why Hawaii is accepted. It may be that there are simply no crows there. But so the same statute that's being held up as a litany against crow hunting has provisions to allow crow hunting within it.
Right. Yeah, because that was a big deal when one of the people in this area had a crow hunting contest.
was, yeah.
And that was a little loud.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and it wasn't a person; it was a club that
Yeah.
person happened to be in a leadership position with.
Right.
And not only was the person attacked, their
Yeah.
business,
Right.
which was completely unrelated to the club,
Oh, it suffered?
but their business. Well, I don't know that it suffered, but it came under fire
Right.
because of that association, which really the one had nothing to do with the
Right.
other.
Right. So, but this isn't just coyotes and crows. Crows are really big too.
Yeah.
They're living well.
Yeah. No.
Because it extended to a whole lot of.
Well, it was a blanket.
Yeah.
It was a blanket law, which often doesn't work good, as we talked about with Act 250.
Right.
But it becomes even more so when we're talking about hunting,
Yeah.
because each species is hunted in a different manner,
Right.
and each species, within that species, any given day in the field may be completely different conditions than the
Right.
day before. So there are all of these variables that play into it that make a single blanket regulation very difficult. And that's some of the testimony we heard from the Fish and Wildlife Department.
Yeah, I know they want to make it rules rather than a law. And Eric and I were talking before the show about who sets the parameter. What is good faith effort? I mean, do
Right.
you track a deer for a half a day or for 5 days, or
What is a reasonable
get your
effort?
friends and do it? I mean, who sets those rules? Because then you can get fined, right? Big bucks.
The proposal was initially 10 points, which is loss of license.
Oh, wow.
So
Serious.
loss of license predicated upon a law that states you must make a reasonable effort. So
Yes.
that it
So
really begs the question, who makes that determination
really.
of what is or is not reasonable?
Right, because if you just wound a deer, that deer can run quite a ways before it drops, and you want to make sure it's not suffering and stuff, but what's a good faith effort?
I shot a very nice deer in Maine several years ago that had a completely healed over, I don't know if it was a bullet hole or an arrow hole.
Oh, no kidding.
But through and through, right through the middle of it.
Oh, wow.
And
That's
it was
interesting.
completely healed over, and he had been fighting for dominance because his neck was all cut up, with
Fighting with the
antler
boys?
ties, so.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so then, the department has said, and two former game wardens were quoted as talking about wanton waste and the need for this. And their initial statements were often repeated by the folks supporting this bill, but what they didn't do was go further through that statement to where each of these wardens said that they didn't feel legislation was an appropriate approach to this, and that they felt that it should be done through the department.
Right, sure, because
through
and
those
it's easier to
mechanisms.
change rules than to go through
is.
changing if you need to make adjustments over the years.
Yeah,
No.
and the department the department and board collectively have generated wanton waste rules by species on several species. Moose, you're required to pack out most of the animal.
Right.
You're not required to bring it out whole, but you're required to bring out all sorts of stuff, including the reproductive organs on a cow.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and all of the meat has to come out, but it's applied specifically to moose in a manner that works for moose. On bear, there was concern about whether or not spoilage.
Right.
So often folks would be in the habit of weighing their bear whole in the
right,
round
but
because it weighs more.
It's dressed, as
Right.
right?
So the rule was put in place that bears must be dressed before they're checked in. That
Right.
way people will just dress them in the field
Right.
and
Cart 'em out.
that helps keep
Yeah.
keep spoilage down. There's a wanton waste rule on fish, actually, in terms of if you are spear fishing or bow fishing, you are required to remove that fish from the water. You're required to take it with you.
Mm-hmm.
So they have these rules that they've already propagated in some instances, and it seems to make more sense to let them continue with that process.
Right. Why do you have to take the reproductive organs of a deer out with you? Why?
My guess is for biological purposes. I think that they can probably tell.
Want to tell what it?
Quite a bit
okay.
about its reproductive life cycle.
Ah,
through that.
okay.
I know out west where they do big, they go 30 miles out for places like elk. It's very similar, and it's just to be able to prove to biologists whether you got a buck or no.
Okay, well, that makes
It's
sense.
sometimes
That
as
makes
simple
sense.
as that.
Because there's specific seasons for buck and doe and.
Right, and they want you to prove that what you shot was legal.
Yeah, I've been to the buck and doe and what's it, Isle Lamont? No, up north it's a bar.
Oh.
But I forget where. So what? There's lots of anything you'd like to specifically talk about as far as a bill, because it goes on forever here. They've got an act relating to hunting and trapping, so they're doing the trappers again this year. Is there anything there to worry about? Or
H410 and H411 are
Yeah.
nifty little bills. H410 is a really in-your-face attempt to take away a significant portion, 2/3 of the training season for bear hounds.
oh wow.
So it would roll that training season back by 2 months. Interestingly, last year there was quite a bit of legislation proposed that was really onerous and negative, and was a fairly blatant attempt to make it more difficult to do nuisance trapping work, to trap animals that were
Right.
being problems. And we got most of that language, we got all of that language removed and replaced it with some language that was actually reasonable and amenable to address some potential for real growth there. At the bottom of H410, there's a small little blurb that does away with all that work that was done last year. And H411 is all of the language that was scrapped last year.
Oh, wow.
Wow, tricky.
Yeah.
So what happens to hounds in the training that they don't like? Why would they cut back what are they doing while they're training?
Because
Using
they
real-
don't like the fact that they're out there running bears. That's what it boils down to. There's a small vocal group who has the ear of a specific legislator, and so it's very easy for them to say this is our flavor of the week.
Oh, great. Do you have a lot of people testifying?
Well, those bills haven't been taken up yet.
Oh, they haven't?
The
Oh,
only
okay.
wildlife bill that has been taken up has been H357. In fact,
Oh, okay.
H308, which is the miscellaneous fish and wildlife
Right.
bill that the department generates every year, that hasn't been taken up.
Oh, no
And
kidding. What are
it
they
doesn't
waiting
look like it's
for?
going to be.
Because I'm sure that Fish and Wildlife put the bill in because they need some of those
They did,
changes made to
yeah.
operate.
Yeah, one of the changes would increase the fees at the conservation camps
Oh,
by $25. It's a fairly nominal increase. Another portion of that, which is interesting, a lot of folks tend to say that the department's just out for money. That's all they care about is money. The current moose lottery statute requires that if there is a moose hunt, 5 of the tags
yeah.
go to veterans, 5 of the tags go to an auction and are auctioned, and 3 of the tags are given to children with terminal illnesses. So this last year, they wanted to have a very small moose hunt, so they only gave out those 13 tags. But the way the statute's written, if anybody, we have preference points because moose tags are hard to get.
Right.
So every year you put in, you get another preference point. Well, folks had to pay in their $10 if they wanted to keep their preference points, knowing that they couldn't possibly get a tag. And
Wow.
that's what the department wants to get away with,
Right.
with that piece of this legislation. They want to make it so that if tag numbers are under 50, that 10% goes to this,
Right,
and do it as
right.
a percentage, and then maintain a cap for when the opportunity arises to have more tags available, because they don't feel it's appropriate to force folks to buy into
No, I
a
don't
lottery
think so
that they
either.
can't possibly win.
Yeah, that doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
That's not good. And then they had, what else did they talk about? The use of crossbows to take deer. We talked about crossbows last time you were on.
Yep, that bill
What does that do?
that bill is kind of passé at this point,
Oh.
because the whitetail proposals for new changes at the board level include that provision that
Oh,
anybody
okay.
would be able to use crossbows.
Have they done anything about the closing of the fish hatchery that we talked about when you were on the
They have.
show? Oh, they have?
Yep.
Is-
Ways and Means
Oh, good.
supported a fee increase. So the
Oh,
Committee on
great.
Ways and Means moved it out with a $2 increase on hunting or
Excellent.
fishing licenses and a $5 increase on combination licenses.
Well,
which-
congratulations.
Well, there are probably going to be some people who are angry about that, but for what we pay, currently a fishing license is $26, and
Yeah.
that's 365 days of opportunity. So
That's great.
at $28,
Yeah, such a
it's
deal.
not it's still a heck of a deal.
Well, I'm glad they took it up so fast, and
And,
the governor's supportive of it, obviously.
The administration is I believe, supporting it at this
Great.
point. I haven't spoken to them
Because
in some
speaking
time,
of an
but
impact on the economy and on the fishing industry here,
yeah,
that would have done it in.
yeah, it's significant. The fishing economy is around $131 million in the state.
That was really
and-
interesting, talking about how the fish hatcheries work.
Or 113 million, my apologies.
All right.
So also, that wasn't significant enough to raise all the funding, so Appropriations Committee actually appropriated another $160,000 to meet the difference.
Oh, terrific.
So
Good
it
for
looks
us.
as though we will be funded in that.
Great. Well, maybe it's a good thing it all was trying to get axed, because it came out okay. I think people realized the importance of it.
I think they did.
Yeah.
It's fairly evident if you look at the numbers
Yeah.
and the realialities of it.
And
the
that was a
value of that.
historic site, which it sounded strange to me that a fish hatchery can be historic, but, have you ever been taken a tour of a fish hatchery?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time at the Ed Weed
Oh, okay. 'cause
hatchery.
That's amazing. I mean, I'm a sort of a fisherman, sort of. As long as you put the thing on the hook, I'm good.
Bait the hook for.
Exactly. If you bait the hook,
So
I'm good.
I assume though that as great as that is, that we've stymied this for this year, that there still needs to be some thought towards what is the long-term solution to this going to be.
There's going to be some ongoing conversation about long-term solutions. This is definitely an interim solution. Fortunately, the House Committee on Institutions actually appropriated some additional monies beyond
Great.
the need to start looking at that and looking at how the future is
Must
going
have
to look.
done a good job testifying.
I didn't
Good for you.
testify on it
You
once.
didn't?
No.
Who was testifying?
So the letter that I generated
Right.
and was co-signed by many of our cooperative
Yeah.
organizations. That letter I sent to all six
good.
money committees within the assembly,
Good.
and so I'd like to think that was impactful.
Yeah.
But there was a great letter that was generated out of the House Fish and Wildlife Committee, urging these committees to understand the
Great.
value of this facility and to
Yeah.
maintain it. So
And now the governor certainly has a good understanding from your meeting with him about how important these fish hatcheries are.
he certainly understands how
great.
important it is to the
Yes,
sporting
good.
community.
So we have 2 minutes left. Do you want to wrap up with anything seriously important here or not? No, that you'd like to let our listeners, viewers know?
I think we've covered a lot of very
Yes,
important stuff.
Is there anything people need to know about the proposed deer hunting changes that can be even covered in 90 seconds?
I would say that the public hearings are beginning,
Right.
and that those dates and times are not off the top of my head, but they're
Yep.
available on the Fish and Wildlife Department's website.
They should speak
And-
up.
Yep. If
Anything
they-
scary they're proposing or just tweaks?
Again, this is getting into personal.
Yeah. Oh.
This is not an organizational position, but I think they're great. I
Oh,
think
do
they-
you? Good.
I think they did a really good job balancing what is honestly a lot of change, but balanced
Great.
change as I see it personally.
Great. You can talk personally. It's okay.
Yeah, from what I understand, they did a great job. They changed the types of opportunity, but they didn't remove opportunity.
No, they didn't. They probably enhanced opportunity. There is the anticipation that based on only being able to harvest $1 a year, that revenue will drop, which again is ironic considering the number of people who say that the department only cares about money. I truly believe that they are very invested in good wildlife management
Good.
and providing good opportunities.
I remember when I was in transportation, we were very busy building a tunnel down on Route 4 for bears,
Yeah.
because they had so that they could go under, because they were getting hit coming on top of the road, because that was somewhere, that was their trail, and that's what they decided to do. Yeah. Do you get involved in trails and any changes to the land?
We have a number of member groups that are local and county snowmobile clubs, but Vast and Vasa have their own
Right.
representation,
Yeah.
and it's very good. So we're kind of
Just-
an auxiliary to
Yeah,
that.
good. Yeah, because they're always doing something out there. Anyway, we have run out of time, and we thank you for coming back. This is show 2 of 2. So if you're interested in what Mike we talked about last show, just look it up and listen to them, watch them back to back. It was great. So we'll see you next week, and in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.